I remember thinking how brutal that job must have been. I apologize in advance if I mess up any of the details. This is one of those stories that stays with you even if you wish it didn't. It's something my best friend used to talk about when we were younger, always in this hushed, offhand way, like it was just a piece of family history. But the way he'd go quiet afterward, that stuck with me more than anything he said. His dad, Tom Halberg, was a logger, not the kind you picture with flannel shirts and axes. This was heavy machinery, remote locations, weeks without seeing another person outside of your partner. He operated something called a tree cutter, this enormous steel beast that could fell and section trees the size of trucks. His whole crew worked by the load, not by the hour, so time was money, and money was pressure. He used to work out past a place called Black Hollow Ridge. I'd never been there myself, just the name alone sounded like the kind of place you don't come back from quite the same. According to what I remember, it took the company over 3 weeks just to carve out a road wide enough for the rigs to get through. After that, Tom and a guy named Joel were the first in. Just the two of them up there for days at a time. There's something about being that isolated that changes people. Or maybe it doesn't change them, it just shows you what's already there. I don't think Tom was ever quite the same after that job. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if it wasn't just the woods that did it to him. They were already deep into the job, 3 weeks or more, somewhere near the summit of Black Hollow Ridge, when the radio weirdness started. I remember Tom describing it like it was one of those things you try to explain but feel crazy even saying out loud. It started small, just crackles and static at first, like background interference, then faint murmurs. Almost like hearing people talking in another room with the door mostly closed. It wasn't anything clear, just chopped up phrases, broken words. Nothing that made sense. But the part that always stuck with me was how it followed them. That's what Tom said. They'd switch frequencies like they'd been trained to do when channels got messy. But the voices, they followed, every time. Which shouldn't happen with those radios. And then, as they pushed farther up the ridge, it all got sharper. The voices stopped being garbled. Just two men talking, calmly, about the most mundane things, gathering wood, making camp, storing food. Totally normal words. But Tom said the tone was off. He couldn't explain how, exactly. Only that it felt wrong, too easygoing, like people who were too comfortable in a place no one should feel comfortable in. He told me once it reminded him of the way people talk when they think no one's around, like they don't need to filter anything. There's something unsettling about that kind of confidence, like they knew they weren't alone but didn't care. Or maybe they knew exactly who was listening. That's the part that really unsettled Tom. It wasn't the voices themselves, it was the feeling that they weren't random, that they were meant to be heard. It still doesn't sit right with me. The tent, the location, all of it. According to Tom, it wasn't just off the main trail. It was hidden, like someone went out of their way to make sure it wouldn't be found. Joel spotted it first, just this faint ripple of blue fabric through the trees. They weren't even supposed to be near that part of the ridge. It was one of those accidental discoveries that happen when you're too tired to care which direction you're walking. Tom said the cold hit hard that morning. That kind of brittle mountain cold that makes everything feel still and sharp. They stood there for a long time before unzipping the flap, maybe hoping it'd be empty, but it wasn't. Inside was a sleeping bag, laid out like someone had just climbed out of it. And then the duffel. Tom never went into too much detail about what they found. Not with me, anyway. But the way he described it, his voice just dropped. He said it was the kind of thing you wish you could unsee. Rope, tiny clothes, crude drawings, all scrawled in thick black marker. Stuff no one should have up there. Especially not alone. And the worst part, the food was fresh. That bag hadn't been sitting there long. Whoever it belonged to had been there recently. Maybe still was. Joel, from what I was told, wanted to leave then and there. But Tom, he was wired differently. Maybe it was pride. Maybe denial. Or maybe, after all those years in the woods, he just couldn't believe what he'd seen. They packed up, didn't touch a thing, and kept working, like pretending it away might somehow make it go away. Tom never used the word sabotage, but I think that's what he meant. It started small, easy to shrug off, A snapped hydraulic line on Joel's machine. One of the saw teeth on Tom's rig came loose and jammed the whole system. At first, they chalked it up to the terrain, or the cold, or just wear from long hours. Logging's rough work, equipment breaks. That's part of the job, but it wasn't just mechanical failures. It was the pattern. The way something always seemed to go wrong at the edge of daylight, or when one of them was working just out of view. The timing got strange, too precise to feel like coincidence. Then came the footprints. Tom said they were clear, deliberate, deep in the mud next to Joel's harvester. No boot treads like the ones they wore. These were smooth-soled, narrow, not made by someone in work gear. That much was obvious. Someone had been out there close enough to touch the machines, close enough to leave prints, and then vanish. That changed everything. Joel stopped cracking jokes. Tom didn't say much at all. They kept working, but the radio chatter dropped to almost nothing. Unless it was an emergency, they didn't speak. And somehow that silence made things worse. You'd think talking would help, make it feel less like they were being stalked. But I guess when you're that deep in the woods and you realize you're not alone, your instincts go quiet before you do. I don't think they ever said it out loud, but something shifted that day. It stopped being just a job. The forest wasn't just isolated anymore. It was hostile. It happened late. The kind of night where the cold seeps through the camper walls no matter how many layers you've got on. Tom couldn't sleep. He told me he'd just been lying there, staring at the ceiling, when the radio crackled back to life. But this time, it wasn't noise. It was voices. Clear ones. Two men. Just talking. Nothing urgent or strange at first, just things like gathering wood, boiling water, basic stuff. But it was the way they said it. Calm, slow, like they were right at home out there. Like it was their place, not Tom's. And buried in between those mundane lines were other things. Things that felt off. Something about watching. Something about them. He never said exactly what they heard, just that it felt wrong. I think that's when he broke. Tom picked up the radio and demanded to know who they were, what they wanted, said it loud enough to wake Joel, though Joel didn't say a word. And then, silence. Not static, not even a click, just this crushing, absolute quiet, like they'd been waiting for him to speak, like they wanted to be heard, right up until the moment he called them out. And after that, nothing. He said that was the worst part. That silence didn't feel like they'd gone away. It felt like they were even closer now, like they'd just decided to stop pretending. He told me it was the first time he truly felt afraid for his life. Not just spooked, not just paranoid. Afraid, because that kind of quiet, the kind that feels personal, you don't forget that. Joel shook him awake sometime after midnight. He didn't even need to say anything. Tom was already halfway upright. There was a sound outside, not loud but unmistakable. Gravel underfoot. Slow, steady crunching. Not the wind, not an animal. Footsteps, controlled, deliberate ones. Someone was right there. I remember him telling me it was like his brain just disconnected. He went to grab his gun and it hit him. He'd forgotten to load it. No idea where the ammo had gone. Just gone. Joel didn't have anything either. And the cops? Not an option. Not that far out. Not when the closest road was hours away and barely passable. Then the camper door creaked. Not open, just moved. The handle shifted, like someone was testing it, seeing if it would give, and then came the scratching. Not frantic, not wild, slow and measured, like fingernails tracing a line into the door, like someone marking the boundary between inside and out. Tom didn't want to move, but he knew he had to. He nodded to Joel, gripped the flashlight with both hands, and crept toward the door. He said he barely made it 3 steps when the door burst open and something slammed into his face. White pain, then blackness, then cold. He was outside, on the ground. There were 2 of them. One held him down with a knife to his neck. The other kicked him over and over in the head. He thought that was it, that this was how it ended. But Joel didn't freeze. He launched out of the camper, full force, took the guy with the knife down. The other one bolted. They both disappeared into the trees. They drove all night, Tom bleeding into a towel, barely able to keep his head up. That cut across his eye, he never fully recovered. It left a line through his vision, a reminder, permanent and unblinking. It was maybe 2-3 weeks later when it happened. The kind of thing you hope is just a rumor at first. You want someone to say it got twisted along the way, that it wasn't true, but it was. One of the guys from the crew, Mark, I think his name was, just didn't show up. No call, no truck in the lot, nothing. They found him off a service road down in a shallow ditch like someone hadn't even tried to hide him. Hands tied, mouth taped, his clothes torn, his body violated. That part was harder to talk about. The part that stuck like a splinter under the skin. Nobody was ever arrested. No suspects, no witnesses. Just a name added to a list that didn't officially exist, of men who went too far out, too deep into places they shouldn't have been alone. Tom never picked up another job after that. Not in the woods, not anywhere near them. He shut down in a way that felt permanent, like something inside him just turned off. As for me, I stopped going anywhere near forests. Not hikes, not cabins. I don't even drive back roads anymore. Can't. It's like those woods are still waiting somehow. And I keep thinking about those men, whoever they were, what they were doing up there. Whether they picked that ridge by chance or if they'd been watching, waiting. That thought's the part I can't shake. Maybe there's no pattern. Maybe it was all random. Or maybe the worst part is that it wasn't random at all and none of us will ever know why. I remember the buzz I felt when I finally set out on that stretch of the Ridgepine Traverse. It had been on my list for ages, something I kept putting off for one reason or another. But last summer, I cleared my schedule, packed up the essentials, and drove out to Fallon Creek. I parked the Jeep, locked everything up, and hitched a ride to the North Trailhead. That ride felt like a final breath before the silence kicked in. I've always done these kinds of trips alone. There's something about not having to make conversation or match someone else's pace that gives me a sense of freedom. That solitude, it's what I came for. No distractions, no deadlines, just me and the trail. The first couple of days went exactly the way I'd hoped. The air was still pine-heavy and clean. The terrain was forgiving, but not dull. I'd fall into a rhythm with my footsteps, the rise and fall of the landscape pulling me deeper into the woods and further away from everything else. I kept to my habit of camping slightly off the trail each night. Not far, just enough so someone walking by wouldn't spot me. It was mostly for peace of mind, but maybe there was always a little voice in the back of my head whispering about worst-case scenarios. I didn't dwell on it. It was just a precaution. That first night, I remember lying in my tent, the fabric walls barely holding back the darkness and forest sounds. But it wasn't fear I felt, it was calm. Back then, I still believed the woods were indifferent, that if I respected them, they'd leave me alone. Funny how confident I was in that. It must have been the third night when I woke up with this pressure in my chest, like I'd been holding my breath in my sleep. I couldn't explain it. There weren't any sounds, no branches cracking, no wind pushing against the nylon walls of the tent, just silence. But something was off. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It wasn't quite that. It was worse. Like the woods themselves had shifted somehow. Like the silence was waiting for something. I stayed still for a while, convincing myself it was just nerves or a weird dream hanging on. But the longer I lay there, the tighter that feeling got. Eventually, I reached for my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The forest was still, same as it always was, but the air felt heavier. I did a slow check of the campsite, just a quick loop, not straying far from the tent. Nothing seemed disturbed. No prints, no snapped branches. When I got back inside, I started going through my gear. Just a way to calm myself down, I guess. But that's when I noticed it. My wallet was gone. I triple-checked everything, pulled my pack apart, dumped out smaller bags, checked pockets I hadn't touched since the first day. Gone. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I left it by the stream when I filtered water. Maybe I buried it too deep in a pocket and just overlooked it. But I knew myself better than that. I'm methodical when I pack, especially on solo trips. I don't lose things. I definitely don't lose something that important, and even now I still can't figure out how it disappeared without me hearing a thing. I think it was the fourth day when I noticed the first one. A trail marker, not missing, not broken, just wrong. It was older, weathered in a way the others hadn't been, and slightly off. Crooked, tilted like it had been yanked up and shoved back in without much care. I remember standing there squinting at it like that would make it make more sense. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe wind had shifted it, or maybe the Forest Service hadn't made it that far yet this season. But it stuck with me. A few hours later it happened again. Another marker. Different kind of wrong. This one was facing backward, as if someone had turned it deliberately. I stared at it longer than I probably should have. Tried to remember the last time I'd looked at the trail app, or if I'd passed a junction and missed it. But no. There was only one path, and I'd been following it without any doubt until now. I kept walking, but the idea wormed its way into my head. Someone was messing with the signs. Not nature, not neglect. Intent, the kind of thing that could get someone turned around fast if they weren't paying attention. And I couldn't shake the thought, why would anyone do that? What purpose would it serve? Nothing about it made sense, but the unease started to build in a different way after that. It wasn't just about the wallet anymore. It wasn't just something weird or missing. It was someone. Someone was out there, and they were trying to confuse me. Those next few days bled together in a way I've never really been able to explain. I remember them clearly, just not separately. Like my brain didn't want to divide them because every part of each day felt the same, quiet, uneasy wrong in a way I couldn't fully place. I didn't notice it all at once. It started small. A lighter I always kept in the same mesh pocket was gone. I figured maybe it slipped out. Then I reached for my multi-tool one morning and came up empty. I knew I'd packed it. I always double-checked that kind of thing. Still, I tried to tell myself it was on me. Carelessness. Maybe I was distracted. But then 2 of my freeze-dried meals were missing. Ones I'd counted and repacked just the night before. That's when I stopped pretending. There was no way I was misplacing this much gear, especially not essentials. I remember sitting on a log at camp, going through every bag, every pocket, just like I did when the wallet disappeared. But it wasn't about the stuff anymore. It was the message. Someone was watching me close enough to know when I wasn't looking. They were coming into my camp, taking just enough to make me doubt myself, but not enough to leave a mess. The weirdest part was how gradual it all felt, like whoever it was wanted me to notice, but not right away. Wanted the fear to settle in nice and slow, and it did. I could feel it in my stomach every time I reached for something and found nothing. I kept trying to come up with a better answer, but I couldn't. I was being watched, and I had no idea when it had started. I don't think there was a single moment where I snapped, no big dramatic break. It just bled in gradually, like fog rolling into a room I didn't realize had windows. I started jumping at sounds that were probably nothing. Branches settling, wind through the trees, maybe even my own footsteps echoing off the hills. But the fear was real, constant. I kept scanning the tree line, convinced I was being watched but never able to spot anything. It made me feel ridiculous, and worse than that, it made me feel alone in the wrong kind of way. There was this one moment I still can't explain. I'd been walking maybe half an hour past my last rest when I stepped forward and felt a splash, like a full-on cold splash up my leg. I jerked back, looked down, and the ground was bone dry. Not damp, not muddy, just dust and pine needles. No puddle, no water. I stood there for a long time, frozen. The sensation was still there, the cold wetness in my boot, even though nothing had touched me. I started questioning everything. Was I just losing it from the stress? From the lack of sleep? And yeah, the sleep. That had become a joke. Maybe 2-3 hours a night, tops. I'd wake up to every sound, heart pounding, convinced someone or something was outside the tent. Then I'd wait, barely breathing, until it passed. If it passed, every day felt like it was bleeding into the next. Nothing was solid anymore. Not time, not my senses, not even the ground beneath my feet. I didn't trust what I was hearing, seeing, feeling, and once you lose that, you've got nothing to anchor you. I told myself if I could just make it to the southern edge of the trail, I'd be fine. Just one long final push. That night, I packed up in the dark and started hiking, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other, every step louder than it should have been. The cold was sharp enough to bite through layers, but I barely noticed. My whole body was clenched up tight, like even my bones were bracing for something. The silence out there, it wasn't normal. It felt like the forest had stopped breathing, and then I heard its steps behind me. Not rustling, not the four-footed scurry of wildlife. No, these were footfalls, measured, slow, and they matched my pace just enough to stay hidden. I stopped walking, so did they. I whipped the light around and caught something ducking behind a tree maybe 20 yards out. My heart was hammering. I raised the beam and that's when I saw him. Or it. I still don't know what word fits. He was crouched low, half covered in brush, clothes all torn up, skin gray with dirt and who knows what else, hair hanging down in thick clumps, and the shorts, they were mine. That hit me way too late. I hadn't even realized they were gone. I didn't say anything, couldn't, just pulled the rifle up and fired into the dirt, not to hit, just to end it. He took off, gone in seconds, like he knew the terrain better than I ever could, and I just stood there, frozen. Every instinct said run, but my legs didn't move. I couldn't process it. I still can't, because there's no reason for any of it. No way he should have gotten that close. No way he should have gotten my stuff. The last stretch of the hike doesn't play back in my mind the way it should. There's no sense of distance or time, just flashes of trees rushing past, the feel of uneven ground under my boots, and this growing fear that if I stopped for even a second, something would catch up to me. I didn't think about food or water or rest. I just moved. When the Jeep finally came into view, I almost didn't believe it was real. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It took a few tries to dial out, and even when I got someone on the line, I couldn't really explain what had happened, not in any way that made sense. Still, they sent someone. The deputy didn't seem surprised. That's what got me the most. He barely asked questions, just glanced toward the trail and told me it was best I didn't hang around. No note-taking, no real investigation, like I'd stumbled into something they already knew about, but didn't talk about. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what he meant. I just drove. That was months ago, and I haven't set foot on a trail since. I keep telling myself it was an isolated thing, that it was just one guy, or a coincidence, or maybe even something I misread in the stress and exhaustion. But there's a part of me that knows better. I didn't imagine my gear vanishing. I didn't imagine someone wearing my clothes, and I sure as hell didn't imagine that feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes I think I got out. Other times, I think I just left whatever it was alone long enough for it to stay put. Either way, I don't think I ever really made it back. I used to love the stillness out here, that kind of quiet you don't get in towns, where the only sounds are your own breath and the occasional creak of trees settling in the cold. It made everything feel clean, honest even. But that morning, something felt off. I didn't notice it at first. I was halfway through my coffee, standing by the window like I always did, just watching the snow. It had fallen fresh overnight, clean, white, untouched, except it wasn't untouched. There were footprints, just one set. They cut through the backyard, crisp and deep, leading from the tree line straight toward the cabin, toward me, and then almost thoughtfully, they turned, not back the way they came, but off toward the edge of the woods again. That's what stuck with me. The way they stopped short of the porch, like whoever made them had changed their mind at the last second. I kept staring at them, coffee going cold in my hands. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe a hunter who realized he'd wandered too close to private property. But no one came this way. You had to go out of your way to get here, and there were no tire tracks, no other signs of anyone passing through the trailhead, just those prints, too straight, too deliberate. I stood at the window for a long time that morning. It was the first time the quiet didn't comfort me. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, like something was waiting just beyond the tree line, deciding whether or not to come back. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I never could stop looking over my shoulder after that. I'd almost convinced myself that the footprints were just a fluke, a weird one-off. I kept busy, chopping wood, checking the generator, making trips into town when I needed to. It's easy to pretend things are normal when nothing else happens for a while, but then the shed changed that. It was early evening, maybe just before sunset. I remember the light was that dull orange that makes everything feel hazy, dreamlike. I was heading out back to grab some tools when I saw it. The shed door swinging half open like it had been nudged by something that didn't care much if I noticed. That door shouldn't have been open. I always locked it, not because I thought someone would break in. No one's out here, but because the lock had become routine. Habit. Still, I told myself. Maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe I'd been distracted the last time I was out there. I stepped inside. The air was stale. Still, everything was technically in its place. But I knew the space. I knew how I left it, and this wasn't right. Tools had been moved, just slightly. A hammer shifted on the pegboard. A crate pulled out from the back wall. The tarp I kept over the old mower folded the wrong way, like someone had looked underneath it. Nothing was stolen, but it wasn't untouched either. I remember brushing my hand along the workbench and seeing smudges, like someone had leaned forward, palms down, but at a strange angle. Like they weren't looking at anything, just listening. I locked the shed tight after that, but I didn't sleep well. I couldn't stop wondering if it was about what they were looking for, or whether they'd already found it and left something else behind. I shouldn't have gone that far out. Not without proper boots, not without checking the weather first, not without telling anyone. But it felt like something was pulling me in, like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for me to step a little further than I was supposed to. It was supposed to be just a walk. We were following what looked like deer trails, barely visible, thin slivers in the snow where the brush thinned out. I kept saying we'd turn back soon, just another 100 yards, just past the next bend. Then I caught the scent. Not smoke, exactly, more like the ghost of it. A faint trace in the wind, too warm for how cold it was. That's when we saw it. A small clearing, half shielded by pine. The fire was dying, just low embers, glowing red and black like something still breathing beneath the ash. There was no tent, no gear, no signs of shelter or food or even footprints leading away from it. Just bones, dozens of them, pale and brittle, arranged in a loose ring like someone had been picking them clean and tossing them aside. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. We didn't speak, but we didn't need to. I could feel it. This wasn't a camp someone left behind. This wasn't forgotten. The fire hadn't burned down naturally. It looked abandoned in a rush, like someone got spooked and didn't have time to stamp it out. Or maybe they didn't want too. We backed out the same way we came, slow, careful not to snap twigs. I kept waiting to hear something behind us. A branch, a breath, anything. But the forest was dead silent again, and somehow, that was worse. He was never quiet. Not once in the 3 years I'd had him. He barked at snow falling off branches, birds landing on the railing, even his own reflection some mornings. It was his way of letting me know everything was still his, still under control, and I'd gotten used to it. His noise was part of the silence out there, a buffer against it, in a way. But that morning he didn't make a sound. I only noticed because the house felt different. Not colder exactly, but hollow, like something had passed through it during the night and taken something with it. I found him by the window, his usual spot, but he wasn't wagging or alert. Just sitting stiff, eyes locked on something outside, ears drawn back so tight it almost looked painful. That's when I saw the prints. Right outside the glass, closer than they'd ever been before. I don't even remember getting to the window, just that I was there, staring down at the snow and seeing those impressions sink deeper than any animal would leave. Heavy, like whoever made them had stood still for a long time, watching, listening, and the dog hadn't barked. That's what kept looping in my head. He should have barked, even a growl, a shift, a whine, but there was nothing. Just that stillness. That awful, unnatural stillness. Like something had taught him not to react. Or worse, like he recognized the presence and knew better. I didn't open the door. I didn't step outside. I just stood there with my hand on the curtain, waiting for something to move. But nothing ever did. Not that morning. It started as a weird pattern I only noticed in passing, scratches in the bark of a pine off the trail behind the cabin. I didn't think much of it at first. Could have been a bear or someone messing around with a hatchet. But then I saw another, and that's when I started counting them. Always 3 or 5 deep slashes. Never 4. The consistency of it was what made my stomach turn. It wasn't random. Someone had chosen a system and stuck to it. The trees weren't just marked, they were chosen. I found one only a dozen yards from the back deck. The sap still wet and sticky, like the cut had been made within the day. It wasn't the kind of vandalism you see from drunk kids or bored hikers. It felt deliberate, the way the marks avoided eye level or how they always faced the same direction. I followed a few deeper into the woods once, just to see how far they went, but I lost track after a while. The cold got sharper the further I went, like even the air didn't want me out there. That night, I dreamed about hands carving those marks, quiet, careful hands that moved like they'd done it 100 times before. I woke up sweating, convinced I'd heard scraping outside. But the yard was empty, the trees still and silent in the frost. Still, I kept thinking someone had to have done that, someone nearby, someone who never wanted to be seen, only felt. There were only ever 2 sets of keys, mine and hers, and I always kept mine in the kitchen drawer under the junk mail and takeaway menus. I'd done it that way for years. But one morning the drawer was just empty. No mess, no forced entry. Just gone. I tore the place apart looking for them. Couch cushions, drawers, coat pockets, even the trash. Nothing. I told myself maybe I'd dropped them outside or maybe I was just misremembering. But I wasn't. 2 days later I found them, sitting right on the porch railing, lined up perfectly, not dropped, not forgotten, left. They were bone dry even after a night of snowfall, wiped clean. No prints. Whoever had them, they didn't panic. They weren't rushing. It was like they wanted me to know we've been inside. We know how to get back in whenever we want. I didn't tell anyone, just drove into town, bought a new lock set and swapped out every latch and deadbolt. It made me feel better for a few hours maybe, but at night the house didn't feel like mine anymore. The shadows were heavier. The silence had weight. I started sleeping with the lights on in every room, like that would somehow keep something out, but it didn't. It never does. Because it wasn't just the door that felt violated, it was something deeper. They'd stepped inside my life, not just my cabin. Touched things, moved things, learned my rhythms. It wasn't about stealing. It was about access, about control. And the worst part is, once someone's done that, they don't need to break in again. You just start waiting, because you know they're going to come back. I'd started walking the perimeter every morning, telling myself it was routine, a way to stay grounded. Truth was, I was trying to prove to myself I still had some kind of control over the place, over my life. The tree line had always been where the woods felt thickest, where the silence felt too intact. That morning, I almost missed it, just caught a faint glint of the wire in the light. It was strung tight between 2 birch trunks, maybe knee-high, a snare, crude but sharp, twisted with intent. Not some hunter's leftover, and definitely not meant for deer. This one was for someone walking upright, someone like me. The knotwork was tight, clean, too deliberate to be some teenager playing wilderness games. The rope hadn't even collected dew yet. It was dry, fresh, newly set, hours maybe, which meant whoever had placed it knew the path I took, knew when I'd be there, knew I wouldn't be looking down. I stood there for a long time, longer than I probably should have, just staring at it, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was escalation. Whoever they were, they weren't satisfied with watching anymore. They were laying groundwork, staging, and I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't a warning. It was a rehearsal, a quiet rehearsal for something worse.